everybody. Welcome to our special AO North America Link session. We're going to talk a little bit about residency interviews tonight because we know a lot of people are gearing up for interviews and or probably already had some even. And even if you're not MS4 and not interviewing yet, hopefully we can give you a lot of good advice as you think about preparing for your interviews when it's your turn around the block there. So what's AO Link? AO Link is all about listening, integrating, networking, and knowledge, like we've talked about before, but a totally new educational program geared towards the medical student level learner. And so we're glad you can all join us tonight to talk about an important professional component of that pathway. We appreciate the support from our AO leadership, Dr. Lee and Dr. Kapatkin. We also appreciate Dr. Aker, who was the founder of AO North America Link. He'll be signing on shortly. Everybody's operating real late. Everybody's busy this time of year getting those end of year surgeries in, I think. And so everybody's going to trickle in a little bit here with us. As usual, Phil and I are here to lead you through this discussion tonight. Phil, tell the audience what your role is at Vandy in terms of the residency and maybe your biggest interview pet peeve.
Sure. So I act as one of our associate program directors within the residency program and co-direct our trauma fellowship. My biggest pet peeve, it's pretty straightforward. It's eye contact. And so it's actually not infrequent. We just finished up our first interview day. And I'd say about half had some struggles with eye contact. And so doing some sort of pre-interview work, mock interviews could be so helpful to pick up on things like that because many folks, you don't even think about it, but eye contact.
Eye contact, that's a good one. Pretty easy, but not always in the heat of the moment there. Perfect. So we have an excellent panel here to share their expertise with you this evening. Dr. McLaurin just finished a case. She checked in a little bit ago, and she'll be on shortly. We'll have her do the whole intro in just a sec. Dr. Jillian Souls joins us as well. Maybe still just finishing up essentially.
My fellow is finishing up for me here.
Perfect. Well, we're so thankful that you're able to join us nonetheless. So we really appreciate your time. Would you just give us a quick intro where you are, what your role is in the residency there, and maybe your pet peeve also?
Yeah, so I'm Jillian Souls. I am an orthopedic traumatologist at UC Davis Medical Center, and I am the residency program director. And I think for me, one of my biggest pet peeves is people who don't know things that are on their CV. So, don't write you're fluent in French if you're not actually fluent in French.
Oh, you mean you're not supposed to lie on your CV?
Or embellish.
Embellish. Sorry.
Or like extra research citations that you just kind of thrown your name around on things just to beef it up, but not. And then I ask you a question like, "Oh, I see you published a paper on total hip replacements," because I do a lot of those, and might ask a question and the applicant really can't speak to it at all. So I think it's important if it's on your CV, you should be able to talk about it.
Yeah. Conscientious padding of the CV, perhaps.
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, thanks again for joining us. Dr. Mike Weaver comes to us from Harvard. Tell us a little bit about your role in the residency there, Mike.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. I wear a few different hats. I'm one of the associate program directors. We have a pretty big program. And so I run the residency at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, which is one of our main teaching sites. And I'm also the fellowship director for our trauma fellowship. As far as pet peeves, I would say I'm going to give you kind of two that are on different side. One is not treating the other applicants with respect and courtesy. So I think everyone's always watching, and I can't tell you, every single year, our program coordinator will tell us of some scuffle or some disagreement and something that happened in the waiting room. And it's very telling. So just know everyone's watching, and this is about being a nice person. That's the number one thing. And then kind of during the interview, I would say not doing your homework. You know, you're interviewing at a lot of different places, and we get it. You're going around, but when you're at one program, you should know about that program and ask some good questions that show that you actually know about that place and that you're thinking about it and you're taking it seriously. We'll talk about this more later, but I think all of us here are going to tell you that we really believe in the match. There's not the best program. There's a great program for you. And so part of that is you doing your homework and showing us that you've thought about it and that you think that you would be a good fit where we are.
Great. That's some excellent advice for sure. Maybe Dr. McLaurin's on. I think I see that she just signed on, but give her a sec here. She may need a sec to get settled, but we'll circle back to that shortly. Perfect. Yeah, she's
Yes, I am here. I just am not on camera yet because I'm like in the dark in a car. So once I get home and I get on my real thing, I will show you all my face. But I'm Toni McLaurin. That's okay. I'm at NYU, and I'm the chief of orthopedics at Bellevue Hospital, which is one of the 3-level or 2 level on trauma centers where they rotate. And I have been uh, doing, involved in residency selection my entire extremely long career at this point. I'm like one of the OGs now. So, um, and I logged in just in time to hear Jillian's pet peeve about not being able to talk about your research. That one gets me too. Like if you have a lot of stuff on there and then someone asks, oh, well, whatever happened with this project? You're like, oh, I don't know. I left before it was finished. Well, make sure you figure out what that was. Don't just have it on there and not be able to talk about it. And that's true of anything, even hobbies. We used to have a guy who interviewed who literally knew everything. And so if you said that you were, someone said that they enjoyed cooking and he asked them how to make a roux and they had no idea what he was talking about. And, which I wouldn't know either, but I don't put on there that I do like gourmet cooking. So if anything that you put on there, make sure that you can speak intelligently about it and or at least knowledgeably, I guess I should say, about it. So that would be my one thing, that people put stuff on there and then you ask them a question and they can't answer it.
Yeah, I think the hobbies is especially an interesting area because yeah, when we're doing interviews, you get a little bit bored of talking about all the same stuff. So if somebody has an interesting hobby there, that's where you're going to go. And so you really that hobbies place is not where you want to conscientiously pad that CV at all is probably what I'd say. So thanks so much for the great intros, but this is just a quick run through of what we talked about so far in the AO North America Link program and where we're going to be going. Next month, January 9th, we're going to talk about distal radius and forearm injuries. And so also don't forget about AO Milestones. Look up that new educational platform, and then don't forget to ask your questions in the Q&A box. There's, don't be shy. Please feel free to ask anything. Now's the time before you don't have this panel of experts available to you. And then lastly, the sessions will be on YouTube. Quick recap of what we talked about last month, or excuse me, that was last week, not last month. This is a quick turnaround, sorry. But we talked about spine and how anatomy is so important and relatively different than other regions of the body. And so when you get a chance and when you're on your spine rotations, you're really going to want to sit down and study that closely. Also have a truly systematic approach to your history and physical, especially that neuro exam, and then the review of the imaging, like doctors Showery and Wayner mentioned last month. And so the other thing I'd say is when you're seeing these consults, if you don't have a robust spine experience, never be afraid to load the boat, if you will, or bump it up the chain of command, because that's always the safest approach. And just a quick plug for AO Surgery Reference here, that there's some excellent resources there as you begin to digest that challenging spine material. And so some of what we talked about was identifying those fractures and the signs of instability like we see here in this cervical spine fracture. and how an ankylosing spine or a dish spine is really more like a femur than we would have thought and requires fixation because it's essentially a long bone. And then you don't want to miss some of those red flag symptoms that signal things like Akata Aquinas syndrome, where you have to act on that emergently, especially things like saddle anesthesia, urinary retention. And so those are things you're going to want to look out for as you see spine consults. Tonight, however, we're going to shift the focus away from the academic curriculum there and really focus on the professional side of what we do, which is just as important. And so tonight, the objectives are to really develop a successful strategy as you prepare for interviews, and then also help you kind of think about how you're going to obtain the information you need to make intelligible decisions about where you're going to rank these programs when you have to submit your rank list. And additionally, you want to ask good questions to get that info, but you're going to need to some way organize that thought process so that you can look back at it once you're going to make that list. And then, of course, we really want you to ace the interview itself with exceedingly, well, maybe not exceedingly, but an appropriate level of confidence. And so we're just going to sort of break down the discussion tonight, at least in terms of how you might experience the interview day. We'll start with before the interview and talk a little bit about preparation. And then after that, we'll talk about how you're going to navigate the day itself. And then the content of the interviews themselves, because there's more to the interview than just the interviews. And then asking the right questions, like we said, so that you can get the info you need to make a good decision about, like we said, what that program is in terms of, is it the right one for you? And then what do you do after all this? And how do you navigate that sort of awkward phase between making your list and submitting the list, and you really like a place, what do you do about that sort of situation? And so just a quick plug before we shut down the screen share and just sort of chat. Next month, we'll talk about distal radius and forearm injuries, so don't forget to join us. And then lastly, don't forget 1AO is happening in April of 2025. And we'd be happy to have med students join us there and learn a lot about the organization and some exciting discussions about AI as well. So let me shut this down and then we'll sort of dive right into things. Perfect. So in terms of preparation for the interviews, what would be your best advice as far as that goes, Dr. Weaver?
I think one of the common questions that I hear a lot from our co-interviewers is like, where do you see yourself in 10 years or 15 years or in 5 years or something like that? And I think it's really important going into interviews to have a good sense of yourself. Like, know thyself is the first rule. Like I mentioned earlier, I really do believe in the idea of a match, and you're looking for the right program that fits with your personality and your career goals. So I think, in general, as a orthopedic surgeon, work ethic and work effort is like the foundation that you need to demonstrate. But in addition to that, like, we're all looking for something extra. What's that extra thing that you want to do? So be prepared to articulate like what kind of career you want. And it's not just like, oh, I'm interested in academics and I want to teach. That's everyone. Like, so it's more show me. So if you're interested in teaching, then be able to explain like, no, I really am excited to have a career teaching, but look at what the teaching I've done so far. Like in high school, I did this, in college, I did this, in medical school, I've done this, and it's leading towards this arc that says this is what my career is going to look like. So I think being prepared means having a sense of yourself and being confident in knowing at least the direction you're going. Like, no one's going to expect you to say, this is going to be my subspecialty, or this is the hospital I want to work at, but certainly have an idea of like the general type of practice that you want to have. Is it private practice? Is it academics? And kind of what have you done to tool yourself up for that? So you're not just kind of bouncing around.
Yeah, that's a great point. And feel free to add on if you have additional thoughts too, in terms of any of the other panel members who might have thoughts about that as well. But I do think that's an excellent point. Yeah, you essentially, I would summarize as actions speak louder than words almost. And so if you've shown and demonstrated a commitment to those things, it certainly is more impactful. I would think. Phil, how about from your perspective, what do you think applicants need to do to prepare prior to the interviews to really guarantee success?
Yes, I think if you just look at preparing in general and not for a specific program, which I think it's kind of two separate topics. So Mike already kind of covered you need to know your CV, your application backwards and forwards, because you never know what somebody may dig into. And so it may be the research, it may be the interest, it may be a paragraph in your personal statement. So knowing it backwards and forwards is key. I really can't overemphasize how helpful a mock interview would be. I as a student didn't do them. I wish I did. Now that I'm on the other side and do them with students all the time, it's so helpful. And so even if you're midway through right now and you're like, I think that interview went okay, but I can't really tell. Would it be a benefit? Absolutely. Ask a faculty member or two to sit down and give you some feedback as you answer some of the more common interview questions. And then lastly would be to prepare responses to common questions. You should be able to nail, tell me about yourself. You should be able to nail, where do you see yourself in 10 years? You should be able to nail, what are you looking for in a program? And I think that what Dr. Weaver said about specific instances to support those statements is like a very insightful and I think unique somewhat approach, because you're exactly right. Where do you see yourself in 10 years? Every applicant says they'll be in academics, but the truth is about 20%, maybe less, probably end up in academics. And so if you have that backing, if you've done a ton of tutoring, and then in medical school, you are leading your interest group and you're taking other medical students and doing your own teaching sessions and these things, if you can demonstrate that and bring that up, it's like, then my ears perk up a little bit. I'm like, okay, this is for real. This person really seems to have a deep interest and isn't just saying that. So, we never expect you to know what specialty you're going to do, because that always is the first thing. Like, I don't know what specialty I'm going to do. I'm like, that wasn't the question, but we never
They should
expect
all
that.
say trauma. Everyone should say trauma.
Well, if you say trauma, then you're in. But so that I think those are the big things. I think I think we should talk about preparing for a program specifically, like the interviews tomorrow. How do I get ready? Maybe after we kind of finish this. So what do you think, Dr. Souls? Any other thoughts about just preparing for interview season?
Yeah, I think, like, as you were saying, if you have the opportunity to either do a mock interview or if you've had the opportunity to have an interview coach, I think that's very helpful. And there is a little bit of a difference in knowing, like, you'll be in person versus a Zoom interview. I think one of the people had put in the chat about that, just, thinking about how to set yourself up for success. If you're certainly going to be if you're going to be doing a Zoom interview, pick a background and, because we don't need to see all the clutter and distractions or things, or your cats running across the screen or whatever it is, trying to find a quiet place, and make sure you test your lighting. You can set up a fake Zoom meeting and test it in advance so you can know that you're coming across okay and that you're not looking like you're, on one of those NBC To Catch a Predators, like sitting in the dark or something like that. So, just little things like that. I think, and then maybe if we were going to start talking about more specifics, I think if you're going to, I'm at UC Davis. So if you're coming to interview at UC Davis, sometimes you might even know in advance, certain faculty that you might be interviewing. I mean, you think the program director might be one of those people? Absolutely. So look me up. I think it's embarrassing if you go to some place and you don't know, who these faculty are that are going to be interviewing you. Even just a brief, like, give yourself a little note card, like, oh, Souls, trauma, Dr. Randall, who's our chairman, oncology. Just know who some of the key players are, because it might make you have maybe a connection with them, or make you more memorable if you kind of start a conversation knowing a little bit about the person who's going to be interviewing you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's like a fundamental and probably the most easy way to demonstrate that you've at least looked at the program and prepared to some degree. And I always think that it was helpful to do that in order to build some common ground, like maybe you went to the same undergrad or something like that, or lived in a similar city at some point. Like there are things like that that you can really use to build on the conversational component of the interview for sure. Anything you might add now that we can see you there, Dr. McLaurin, about preparing for specific programs prior to even the interviews themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a great point about, know where you're going and think about, there's going to be certain people that are definitely going to be involved in the interview process. And so that and so, make sure things or, be able to say something about why that program specifically interests you and not just, I want to be in the Northeast or, my partner is matching, is already working in such and such city. So that's where I want to go. I mean, those are, those valid reasons, but, also there's got to be something about that particular place where you are, because there are plenty of other places they could be. So, just make sure that you have like a good reason, what is it about this one particular program that really is attracting you and wanting you to be there? And if you can't think of anything off the top of your head, you really need to have thought about this question beforehand, because that's not one of the questions that you want to be sitting there sort of hemming and hawing and trying to pull something out. And another thing, just to go back to, questions is things to be sort of prepared for, a lot of places they have like set questions, and there's always some sort of like ethical things and, or something about yourself as a person, like something you did that, you were, maybe when you made a mistake and how did you deal with it, or when you were in a situation that was uncomfortable and, what did you do to address that sort of thing. So think of, have some like incidences that, incidents that happen to you that you can think about that sort of show the kind of person that you are. Because, and I mean, I'm sure probably there's no one's going to ask you a question that you couldn't have like figured out from the internet looking at, common job interview questions. And just have sort of like a few things in your back pocket that you don't have to hem and haw and fumble about.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, isn't it? Across the programs, anybody do structured interviews at their program versus just sort of free conversation? Or
We're sort of a mix. I mean, we have like we interview in pairs. And so the applicants go to different rooms, and each room has sort of a theme. And so we talk about that, but that's not the only thing that you talk about during the time. But that question will always come up. And it's just a matter of how, and as part of the team that's asking you the questions, we'll weave it into the conversation in different ways. But it is going to be every single person who gets interviewed will get asked the same question by the same pair.
oh, okay, is that the same? I saw you raise your hand, Dr. Souls.
Yeah, we have it similar, to how what Dr. McLaurin's describing, and but myself as program director and my vice chair of education, we kind of get a free for all to just get to know people, and then we have other sort of rooms, if you will, where it's like insight and humanism and ethics and things like that, where in our minds we've created some a pool of questions for those interviewers to pick from that sort of tease out some of these attributes that we want to get to know a little bit better. So I would absolutely agree, with what Dr. McLaurin is saying. Like, you have to know that we're going to ask you about some hardship or some time that you had to make a difficult decision, or, sometime that maybe you failed at something and how you overcame. Just have an answer, for that. I think one of the hardest things is you start to ask an applicant something, you only have, maybe 8 to 10 minutes to get to know them sometimes. And then they start looking at the sky. Oh, that's a good question.
Oh,
of course it is.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not like you have to immediately dive right in, but you should have some, oh, yes, thank you for that good question, or thank you for that thoughtful question. And then you can begin your, response, but you should have something sort of in your pocket. And I mean, I'm not going to call up, all these people on the panel and say, hey, did applicant, A, B, C, whatever, say the same thing to you? I mean, if you tell the same story 10 times, nobody's going to know.
we all give the same lectures over and over again when we go to different, programs and different meetings and things like that. So, it's not, you don't have to be unique every single time you do something.
You
Hey,
know,
Dr. Aker. I got a question for you. One of the folks asked on the Q&A, the tell me about yourself. I'm sure you've interviewed hundreds of students and residents, and you've gotten the 15-second response and you've gotten the 15-minute response. What are you actually looking to hear when you say, tell me about yourself? Do you want to hear hobbies? Do you want to hear where they grew up? What are you looking to hear?
That's a great question. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Sorry about that. I was just finishing up a long day in the OR. It's a great question because everyone interprets it differently. Personally, I love the idea of a brief intro. Assume that perhaps the folks sitting across from you haven't had a chance to read every single page of your application or your letters or your personal statement. So just give them a quick 30 seconds, where you're born and raised, where you're from, where you went to med school. Boom. Okay, that brings us up to now. That kind of gives a very quick background, maybe some pertinent positives of your childhood that you think might be relevant to orthopedics. Well, I grew up on a farm and I worked with my parents building fences, and I've always really enjoyed working with my hands from a young age. My dad was a mechanic and I worked in the garage with him. And so I knew from an early, like some story that's relevant that makes you a bit more endearing in that situation always goes a long way. But no, I think the worst thing for the so-called elevator speech is to have only 20 seconds worth of intel. On the flip side, folks that are going to talk for 15 minutes straight, sometimes it's exhausting, and we were going to cut you off, and we got to get to other topics. But somewhere in the middle, I mean, I think you want to come off as personable, as talkative. A lot of times, that's the opening question for an interview. It's like, hey, Tim Aker, welcome. This is what I do here. So tell us a little bit about yourself. It's kind of this open-ended, where do you want to take it from here? But I think the applicants should always prepare for that question and not like rote memorization, but have a story that you want to tell. Be engaging. Start with broad where you're from and narrow it down to how you got here, how and why you're interested in orthopedics and this program. And sometimes you'll be surprised at where it takes you, where your hobbies are doing something with your hands as well. Or on weekends, I like to volunteer at the SPCA. Oh my gosh, I have 3 dogs. Oh, you like dogs? Like, tell me about that. Like, you never know where the conversation is going to take you if you're just open and honest and enthusiastic.
Yeah, I think if you bring it up in that, be ready to talk about it in case something catches piques an interest. And then if there's something in your personal statement, you broke both tibias as a 7-year-old and were casted and then were infected and all, maybe hit that as you're going through it, because they may not have read your personal statement. They may have combed and know everything, but if that is a critical turn, fork in the road in your life, I agree. I think that you can go way too long, but if there's some important things in how you got to where you're sitting, bring them up and don't expound too much, but leave a little meat on the bone, and then we'll start chewing on it, and then you'll be, next thing you know, 20 minutes will have flown by, so
But
I'm gonna change
Phil,
the topic.
don't tell me
Yeah.
about, I don't want to hear about your ACL tear. Okay, so.
It's true. If
Yeah.
it's real trauma, we're good, but otherwise.
Yeah, I was just about to say, don't start out say, well, I got interested, every personal statement, I got interested in orthopedics when I tore my ACL. It's like, yeah. So yeah, I mean, if it's something like really, I mean, I would think, being 7 years old and breaking both your tibias, or that's a little bit more dramatic. But, and it's not like you said, I want to be an orthopedic surgeon when that happened, but that might have sort of channeled something later. Like, I did actually have a tibia fracture when I was 14, just one. And when I went to medical school, we had to spend a month on a surgical subspecialty rotation. And I just thought, oh, I had zero thoughts of ortho. And I said, let me just see ortho from the other side. And that was how I got into it. So that's a little bit different than saying, I had this injury and that's when I decided I had to be an orthopedic surgeon. So just don't, you don't want to sound like everybody else, but if there is something very interesting, or, if you had something and, you had like some congenital spine issue and you've had like 37 surgeries, that really obviously would have affected your life and the person that you've become. That's something worth talking about. But probably like half the people in any residency where you're interviewing have torn their ACL, or maybe 3/4. So that doesn't really set you apart.
One thing I've heard from a couple different people now is talking about your hands. And I think being able to relate your personal experiences to how you work with your brain and your hands is really important. This is a manual specialty. You're going to be working with your hands. We want to know that you're somebody that has used your hands to do something. You don't have to have done, animal surgery or something like that, but it's really good to have a story that tells us that you know how to use your hands.
I'm going to switch topics now to kind of more of a game day discussion. It's interview day. It's actually the night before interview day. It's the night of the social. So, Mike, when y'all are talking about applicants, when you're reviewing applications and it's said and done, does what an applicant does at the social, does that actually matter, of how they conduct themselves? Or what advice will you have for a student who's walking in to the social?
Yeah, I think the social things are a really tough thing because some people are naturally extroverted and other people are introverted, and so everyone comes with a different set of stuff. I think, the social event is definitely an opportunity to get to know people though. And when we're doing our rank list discussions, the social event comes up a lot. And it's not, it's sometimes a negative, like there was a negative interaction and we noticed this applicant said something bad about someone else or belittled another applicant. That's like done. But other times it's a chance to get to know the applicants in a less formal setting, and they're a little bit more relaxed, and so you get a little bit more of that color out, and like what was your life like, your childhood, things like that come out a little bit more. So I think the social is a great opportunity to talk to the faculty. It's also a really great time to talk to the residents. When we do our social, for example, we have appetizers and dinner, and then the faculty are asked to leave, and the residents hang out with the applicants, and they get a chance to ask all the questions that you want to know about what is it really like in our program? What are the faculty really like? Is this a city you want to live in? Is this a program you want to be at? So I think the social is really important.
Yeah, like for our social, the faculty's there at the beginning and then they leave. And then a lot of times there's like, the social after the social that continues to go on. But I think you have to be very careful at the social. I would say I've probably seen it hurt people more than I've seen it help. I used to be at Emory a million years ago before I was at NYU, and we would have the socials at faculty's homes. And we were at the chairman's house one time, and one of the residents was like hitting on the chairman's wife. So that didn't really go over real big. So that was bad. Another applicant like got so drunk that they passed out at the social. So watch your alcohol intake at the social. It's a chance to have fun, but not go nuts. I've known, people who were really well thought of until like, sometimes they'll also have events at places where, if anyone's still in town, like the interviews on a Friday, say if anyone's still in town, there's a group going out tonight, whatever. And those actually, I think, tend to be worse because people are sort of letting, they've let their guard down. And I've definitely seen those events where people, were like really highly thought of as an applicant and after the interview process, and then they hang out with the residents afterwards. And then it comes back and says, oh, this person was like totally out of control or whatever. So just the social is great, but use it as a chance for an informal interaction with the residents, and not so much as a chance to fill up on as much free alcohol as you can. And also I would say for the attendings, like for me, I interview because I think it's important, and I think it's important to have different types of people interviewing because otherwise you get like one kind of resident. But I'm the world's biggest introvert, and it is so difficult for me. So if you were at the social and that, by then you have your interview list, you're interviewing, and don't talk to me about all your stuff because then I don't have anything to say to you the next day at the interview. And I've actually cut applicants off before at the social and said, hey, we can talk about all this stuff tomorrow when I see you. You know, why don't you go hang out with the residents or something like that? So just be careful about like having the interview at the social.
Yeah, that's a good point for sure. I think somebody brought up another interesting point about the social as well. And sometimes you can bring a plus one like your significant other. What do you guys think about that in terms of bringing a significant other to the social? Any advice on navigating that? Because it's definitely a balance. Because and yeah, I think at least from my perspective, I'd say you probably have to really balance um, paying attention to your spouse, but also everybody else there. So I think it's probably a tricky situation.
Yeah, I'll transition that into asking Aker another question because I I agree. It's like I think one of the intents of a social is not only for you to go and meet residents and whatnot and have another opportunity to show your stuff, but it's to evaluate the program to them, like what the resident culture is like, how they're getting along, and if there's a distraction, not to say, thankfully my wife's not within earshot here, but not that she'll be a distraction, but I wouldn't want another distraction to truly evaluating and being in that place with that group of residents or faculty or whatnot. So I don't know, what do you think, Aker, in terms of the value of a social for kind of seeing what the culture of the program is like? Is there value in that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think especially there's going to be a lot of students offered interviews where they did not rotate. And really, all you know about a program is reputation, social media presence, things you read online, talking to friends or folks who matched last year. I mean, if you're traveling across the country, I think it's important to get out there, get to the social, make time to get to the social, and try to figure out, is this a place where you could spend the next 5 years? As for bringing a significant other, if they are invited and you have that interest of bringing someone, by all means, I would not shy away from doing that, keeping in mind that you still have to engage with the residents, the faculty, everyone. Don't go sit in a corner somewhere with your loved one. You really need to mingle and interact. But again, to the culture where I did residency, not a single resident was married. In fact, most were single, not even like in relationships. But the residency where I work now, probably well over half the residents are married. And so I think if you come to a program and some of the residents bring their significant others and you have a significant other, your significant other might be like, oh, baby, this is a place where maybe you need to take a little bit more seriously. Like, this looks like a very family friendly culture. A lot of the residents have kids. Like, this is a place, this is what we were looking for. So it works both ways. If you bring a loved one, just keep in mind, you don't want to go and be on an island.
Any other tips there, Jillian, before we change topics? And then the next topic discussion will be like on the actual interview day, not while you're in the room with somebody being interviewed, while you're walking from room to room, while you're interacting with staff. Any pearls on that? So first, final tips on the night before, and then
Yeah.
secondly, thoughts on the day of.
Yeah, so just that final thoughts that someone had asked, and I just typed a quick answer, but if you cannot attend the social, that is okay. Okay, I think you just have to understand that it's, we're not judging you on whether or not you go. It does give you an opportunity to learn more about the residency program and get to know the residents, particularly if you were not a rotator, but it will not negatively impact your application. And I would say, thinking about the interview day, there's times that my coordinator has said somebody was, whether they were, an AI rotating and having email communications, or whether it was like during the interview day, were rude to staff or other people. Be very careful. Everybody is watching you kind of all day. And so if you, approach someone and you're not, you're kind or you're unfriendly or you say something off, like, you have to be very cautious about that. It's really important to just, try to be the best version of yourself possible because everyone is paying attention. And also, when you have those intermingling moments, those are more opportunities to ask the residents questions to say like, hey, what's res life really like here? Or if you are, single, saying like, hey, are there a lot of single residents? Is this a place where, maybe people are more friendly or getting together? Or is this a place where everybody's married and at the end of the workday goes home with their families and I'm going to be sitting there all by myself? You might have an opportunity to just again interact with the residents and kind of ask them a little bit more about what their daily life is like.
Yeah, any other thoughts there, Dr. McLaurin, on kind of interacting on the day of the interview outside of the interview rooms, but just kind of when you're mingling around or moving from place to place?
Yeah, I just cannot overemphasize that point that Dr. Souls made about how you interact with everyone else who's there, even if you're just passing by, like somebody's secretary or office manager or something in the hallway, smile, say hello. The person who's helping to, move you from one room to the next, be very pleasant to that person. Just anybody that you encounter, know that they're looking. And then also take the opportunity. There will be downtime when you're with residents. And especially like if somebody, for whatever reason, weather or whatever, they miss their interview. And so sometimes there'll be sort of gaps and things in there. And when you have time, not just sit with the residents and talk with them, but sort of sit back and watch them and watch how they interact with each other and get a real sense of, what is the what is the feel like here? How are these people? Do these look like they're friends or do they look like people who just all happen to work in the same place and have to be together? And you can get a decent sense of that. I remember there was a couple of years in my residency, things were kind of bumpy and there were a few, and the residents who were the ones who were selected to sit around with the applicants were a couple of the disgruntled ones. And we ended up going really far down the rank list for exactly that reason, because people sat in the room and they're like, oh, these people are all miserable. I don't want to come here. So, pay attention to sort of the unsaid things that are around you when you have those moments outside of the interview room. And that can help you to make your decision, both positively and negatively. You might also sit there and say, wow, all of these people look like they really enjoy being here and being with each other. And this looks like a great place to spend 5 years. So it's not always going to be a negative interaction, but just really do a lot of observing in addition to interacting.
Mike, other thoughts? And then Dr. McLaurin brings up a great point, which is like there's a little bit of downtime. Sometimes you may be talking to residents, but we live in a technological world and that burning phone in my pocket needs to be checked. So thoughts on phone etiquette as well when you got like some downtime, what would you do now if you were a student? How would you approach a situation like that? You're muted.
That's my Zoom etiquette that I'm failing right there.
There you go.
I agree with Jillian and Tony. The other thing I would say, and maybe make this a positive, is get to know some of the people that you're interviewing with. And I don't mean like the faculty and the residents, like I mean the other medical students. Like orthopedics is a very, very small world. And you're going to see these people again and again and again. Like one of the first people I met on the interview trail was Mike Glotzbecker, who was someone that ended up matching with me. We went to residency together. I had no idea because we were in Chicago when I met him, and I didn't meet him again until I showed up to residency. And he's become a great friend, and he's wonderful. And there's countless people like that across. So try to get to know some of those other people that you're with, because this is a small community, and these are going to be your colleagues and your brothers and sisters for the next few decades. So kind of dig in with them and you'll make some really good friends.
Yeah, just real quick, we actually had a resident who ended up meeting the person that she ultimately married on the interview trail. So that's how close you might get to the people that you're, going from place to place to place interviewing with.
I think that's a great transition to a question I want to ask Dr. Aker, because you have interviewed hundreds of people. And the first impression that you have of these hundreds is often that interview. And I think there are probably two sitting on this Zoom right now where the first time that you and I met was through an interview. The first time I think you and Taylor met was through an interview. So maybe speak about that, how you're at a program where maybe you're not that interested, this is going to fall this may not be that high on my list, but I'm still going to go. Is that still important? And then, you know, these are again, the first time we met was on an interview, so kind of speak to that.
I mean, to that end, you never know the magic of the match. You never know where you're going to end up. So you have to treat each and every interview like it's game 7 of the World Series. Like you gotta go for it. Every single interview, every interaction, every sit down. I was thinking earlier when we're talking about like even in between when you're going in between rooms, like be nice to the people who are shepherding you. Like I gotta say, like there is no cheat code for this. Like if you're a jerk, go ahead and be a jerk. Like I'm not here to help you cheat your way into residency. Like I hope that you're a good person and that you should offer gracious gratitude to the folks who are serving you lunch that day, and that you're just an honest person that carries yourself in such a way that we want to be around you too. You know, so that was the first thing I was going to say. Is that there's no cheat code. The bottom line is show up, be yourself. One thing that I remember about Taylor specifically in his interview is that the kid wouldn't stop smiling, and that is memorable. And it wasn't a fake smile. He's one of these people that is very happy. He's not on my screen anymore. Is he still around somewhere? There he
He's
is. Oh, there's a
smiling right
smile.
now.
He's
There he
still
is.
around smiling.
There's a smile. But I think a smile just goes so far. Everybody's nervous. Everybody's a little bit kind of fidgety and nervous, and yep, the phone's buzzing in your pocket. But if you can just focus and dial it in and prepare for the interview. That's one of my favorite questions. Is just it seems kind of casual. Hey, how did you prepare for this interview? Because it's so open ended, and you know, yet I have no idea. Do you know who I am? Why are you in Houston? Why do you want to be here? What you know? How did you prepare? And if folks just kind of mumble and mumble, it's like, all right, you know. Or if it's more of a generic preparation like I do for all my interviews, that's okay. But I kind of want to know like what makes you unique to us and vice versa, you know? So there's a lot of different ways folks are going to ask that question, but hopefully in the end you should just be yourself. Just be yourself.
I just want to get back to the phone etiquette thing a little bit here. Just remember also that when you're, you know, in any interaction, you know, when you're with other applicants, if you're just sitting on your phone the whole time, you're losing out on an opportunity to talk to other people. Same thing when you're sitting around with the residents. Certainly when you're in the interview, if you get a buzz on your watch, do not look at your watch. Do not look down. There's nothing that is happening to you that can't wait 8 minutes. So, and if it can't wait 8 minutes, then it can't wait 1 minute. So it's like, it's too late, you know? So just keep that in mind, you know, but be present where you are at the moment. I know nobody is present anymore, but be present. And remember, there's like old people like me who, you know, none of this stuff existed for, you know, a large portion of my life. And so I'm just like fascinated when I get on the elevator in my building. I live on the 28th floor and people literally step on the elevator. The minute they're on, they have to pull out their phones. I was like, you can't ride down 28 floors in an elevator without looking at a phone. So, you know, and again, there are other people around, there are people watching. And if you literally step out of the exam room and you're on the exam room, you step out of the interview room and you're on your way from one room to the next and you pull out your phone in between, someone's going to see that. So just keep that in mind. Everything can wait. Even, you know, put your phone in your bag or whatever. I mean, but be present.
Yeah, do not disturb for
Yeah.
sure. Those are all really great insights. I think we're going to shift gears once more and talk a little bit about the portion of that interview where, you know, at the end of the interview, you always ask like, oh, what questions do you have? And I think students are always, you know, back against the wall are like, well, what, you know, probably one of the most common ones that we had touched on this a little bit last year was like, what changes do you see happening? But beyond those things, what are the best questions that the applicants, that the students can really ask to learn the most about a program, like actually have effective questions in that scenario rather than just like something generic that really doesn't uh benefit them in terms of the information I'll yield.
I think I'll kick it off. I think one thing that comes up is sometimes applicants will like to ask specific questions about the program, like a specific rotation or something like that. If that is coming from a genuine area of interest, I think that's great, you know. But if it's like you just heard about the international rotation during the introduction 5 minutes ago, and you're like trying to just fill time, and you're like, so what's the international rotation like? Then that is not, it's gonna be a short response probably for me because it doesn't come from a genuine area of interest in my estimation. But so if you're going to ask a question, that's specific, that may be where you kind of do a little bit of research beforehand, knowing that you're going to ask that question. And then I can't give you the specific best question to find the most out about a program, can't give all my secrets, but I do think the best questions are the ones where you learn something about the place that you're at. And sometimes that means, hey, tell me about a graduating resident that you're really proud of, or tell me about what, a resident who's graduated, who's doing something that really makes you proud of what this program, puts out there. Things like that give the opportunity for us to brag on the product. And then also you're learning about what we value, at whatever program you're at. I think it's super insightful. And so if they say, well, our best resident just published his 100th paper in over 3 years, and it's like, okay, I know what this program's about, what the mission is here. Or if it's like, well, my proudest resident just did his, first scoliosis case, and he's 3 months in. It was a really complicated case, and I was proud of that. Then it's maybe more operative focus. So I think you get a lot of insight on some of those types of questions, but I can't give away all my secrets. So I don't know, Mike. You're next to me. What do you think?
Well, one thing that I think about is that it's okay to ask the same question to a few different people. Like, we're not in that other room. So like, if you're like, well, it's been a long day and all my questions are answered, you're like, well, you're not that interested. But if you ask the same question you just asked 10 minutes ago, like, we have no idea. And so we can tell you this, like a different perspective. So it's okay to ask the same question to different people. And you may get the same answer or you may get different answers. But no, to Phil's point, I think, asking about what programs are proud of is really telling. Like, because you want to get into their heads and like, what is this place like? And is this a place that's a good fit for me? And I think that really goes to that. So I think, digging into the relationship the faculty have with their residents and how that carries on over time is really important.
I think, along that similar line, but also asking a program, if there's something that they feel makes them unique, what makes your program unique or different, or, it's kind of a similar question, but it could take you in a different direction. But generally, as you said, don't ask about something if you're not truly interested in it, or like, Phil said, you heard it 5 minutes ago. But if you truly are interested, are there opportunities for me to do an international elective? Are there opportunities? That's a valid question, because maybe you're really interested in mission work, or you have a background of mission work and you want to make sure that you have the opportunity to continue that. And that tells us something about you as well. So sometimes you can use those questions as an opportunity to still not only learn something about the program, but also to show them something else about yourself. So, and also that you're thoughtful. Like you said, don't just say, oh no, I have no questions. Well, really? Like, you're just navigating this process for the first time and you have nothing? So come up with at least a question.
I've been in the interview process before. One gentleman that I interview with for fellowship interviews, sometimes after a brief intro, he'll just say, tell me, what do you want to know? What can we answer for you? And like, that's literally like the rest of the interview, like 15 minutes of like, what else? What else do you want to know? What else do you want to know? What else do you want to know? So I don't think they're going to get into that situation, but I would remind the students that they should have more than one question in the queue. Have several, many ready to go. It's also nice if you have them up here, because if you have to look at your phone or get out your little sheet of paper, that's okay. That's okay if you're having a brain fart. But ideally, you'd have some off the top of your head that you could, and hopefully you would be inquisitive about that program. That just gets back to just being yourself. You should be naturally inquisitive about this program.
Those are all great insights about questions for sure. I think the one other question that came up in the chat was a little bit interesting, was navigating questions about strengths and weaknesses, and how are there any tips to I guess navigate that question without being like giving like a cheap answer in a way.
I think I'd still workshop it. I'd do some mocks. I'd just be honest. I think sometimes, it's hard. I have a difficult time saying no. You may find common ground because a lot of us have a difficult time saying no. So I think be honest. There are obviously some red, flags, probably topics to stay away from, that are kind of obvious, I think. But that's what I'd say. I workshop it. I'd sit down and mock it as well too, based on what you believe your weaknesses are, and be honest. Ultimately, would be my advice.
I also think it's good if there is a weakness to speak to how you're working on it. Like this is my weakness, and you know what, like I was really struggling with this, and these are the 2 or 3 things that I've been doing to work on it. So it shows us that you're thoughtful, but you're also working on self-improvement. No one's perfect.
Yeah, and that's another thing that you should have in your back pocket, the strengths and weaknesses thing, because you might not be asked it specifically, but there are different ways around it coming to the same place. Or you might be able to kind of think about, maybe your answer to what your weaknesses were. And then, all of a sudden you remember like some anecdote about something that happened that really showed that. And that's something that you could tell about, so don't just have like a list of, strengths, ABC, weaknesses, XYZ, and that's it. But have be able to flesh it out a little bit, like Mike said, be able to go somewhere with it, not just say that, like an evaluation form, 2 strengths and 2 weaknesses,
And it looks like somebody's asking in the chat about, if there was concerns about the application, or or something negative on the application. I think this goes a little bit along those lines. Is one of the weaknesses might be an unmatched applicant, that was something. If somebody calls you out on a low board score, a non-match, something that seems a little odd, you should be prepared for that. You should know, just don't say like, well, the match rate was only 60% and that sucks, I got overlooked. No, you should say, I, reflected on my application and I noted that maybe I was weak in this one area and I didn't have a lot of research in, so I found a mentor and I did a research here. Or, have some answer. I don't know what it's going to be, because it's obviously going to be different for a lot of people, but the answer shouldn't be like, I just got shat on, or it was just bad luck, because that might be the case. Maybe you are just a phenomenal applicant, but you should have an answer if someone asks you about something that could be seen as negative, like I said, like a low score or an unmatch or something like that. Because you're not alone. There's a lot of people out there. If you're listening or watching to this, there's plenty of people, that we've interviewed that hadn't matched, and they oftentimes they ultimately do. It was just they had to reflect on what it was that they could do to make their application stronger.
Right. And even if if you say, I don't really understand why I didn't, but these are some thoughts that I had that might have contributed to it. And I tell people, if there's like a blemish on your application in any sort of way, don't be afraid to bring it up. And in fact, it might, help you to just put it out there, don't try to hide things. And same thing, even, when people are doing their personal statements and, if there's like 3 years that you took off because you were, doing whatever, I mean, hopefully not in jail or something like that, but, just if there's something that went on in your life, or even, I've had people who left school for a while to take care of an ill family member. And they're like, well, I'm worried because there's a big gap there. I'm like, bring that up. that speaks more about your character than anything else. So when you have weird things in your application that you think make you look sort of funny and outside of the norm, to us, it's like, oh, this person, had these things to deal with and still managed to be sitting in the same place as this other person who just went straight through with no adversity.
Yeah,
So
everybody's got
don't be afraid of your flaws.
yeah, for sure. Everybody's got unique experiences. There was a question about that to some degree, and I think if you really dive in and get introspective, that you'll find something there beyond just your ACL tear. Ultimately, people always struggle at the end of the interview with what do you do in that period afterwards. And I think one of the interesting ideas, and we may go over time just a little bit here, but thinking about how do you navigate one, dissecting the interview day and reflecting on that experience, but also dealing with post-interview contact. And maybe Mike, you can take that one.
Yeah, I think, one, use this as a growth experience. Like, a lot of us are very uncomfortable in the interview thing, particularly as a medical student, you may not have done this a lot. So even though it's uncomfortable, dig in and be self-reflective and try to learn from it. So the next one you can do a little bit better. I think, reaching out and saying thank you is never the wrong thing. Even if they say don't contact us and don't expect something back, but a brief thank you to your interviewers is just a nice, courteous thing. Is it required? No, but it's nice. And then one thing that we haven't touched on at all yet, but is worth thinking about, is orthopedics is a small world. And I don't know how you guys do it, but in our program, we have 2 big interview days, and the next week we come up with our rank list. And once that rank list is made, it's not changing. Like, it's very hard to change things because the program director really respects all the faculty that put their time into making that list. And so if you have a particular interest in a program and you have faculty that are behind you, the sooner they call and kind of reach out, the better. And so if you know that a program is your top one, like if you want to go to UC Davis and you know someone that knows Jillian, they should call her before your interview or right after. Like, that's the time to play your card. If you play it a month later, when like you've done all your interviews and now you've finally made the decision, you're like, Jillian's going to pick up the phone. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, it says it was good, but it's not actually going to change anything. But if you have that opportunity to do it before you go into the room or right after, then maybe you can tip the scales a little bit. So if you have a card to play, I would play it sooner rather than later.
But only play one, because we do all know each other. And if you call or write me an email and says UC Davis is my first choice, and then you write Bill an email and you say that he is also your first choice, guess what? We're gonna find out. So you can't do that. So you have to be truthfully honest. And I think someone had asked that in the chat, but if you have a program that you're, because this happens all the time, and I've gotten emails in the last year, and they were residents that ended up matching with us because we liked them, they were rotators, and then they wrote us in a message and they said, UC Davis is my number one, and we believe them. And so just use that very, specifically, and just to the one place. Don't go like, you're my second, you're my third. Nobody wants to hear that. Just tell your one favorite place that all your heart is there. That's what you want to do.
And also, if you had a resident that you connected with either during a rotation or even on the interview, reach out to that resident as well, because we get input for our applicants. We have the residents rank, or they evaluate all of the rotators who went through. And we also have one of our interview rooms are our 3 executive chief residents. So they're sitting there and they're hearing stuff as well. So if it's, especially if you rotated with one of the previously with one of the residents who's then in the interview process, then they can bring that up at the selection meeting. But just, don't be afraid to also reach out and connect with residents, because we do listen to what the residents have to say, because they tend to see a slightly different version of you than the one that you might present to us.
Oh, they were at the social.
The older we get, the less honest the presentation is, because you're going to be more sort of chummy with the younger faculty members who are like close in age to you. But I'm like your grandma or whatever, and so you're going to be very different around me. And so I think that it's important to just to make sure that people are really, you're seeing the real people and that they're seeing the real you.
All right, great. Well, we're almost 5 minutes over time, so we'll probably wrap things up. But any last piece of words of wisdom for the interviewees? We can just go down the line. Let's go, Dr. Aker first.
Be yourself. Be honest. Be yourself. Be engaged. Be enthusiastic. And take it from Taylor Young. You should smile. Look at that. Look at that smile. Look at that thing. But that's it. Just be yourself. That's the best advice. I mean, it's okay to be nervous, but don't let that paralyze you. You know, try to do whatever you need to do, deep breathing, whatever else. But I think preparation is really the key to feel relaxed in an interview room. So you put in your homework, you put in your time, and you show up prepared, and it'll show. It'll show on your face that you'll have the confidence and you're going to enjoy the process. And good luck.
Great. Dr. McLaren, you're next on my screen. So
Okay. My big thing is be present, understand that you are being watched, but also that you need to be watching. You need to be observant, and you need to really be aware of where you are and what you're seeing and what's going on, and process all of that stuff. And you might go someplace that is your number one choice until you spend a day there interviewing, and then you leave and go, oh boy, that's not where I want to be. And don't discount that feeling, because they're supposedly on their best behavior that day, and if that best behavior isn't working for you, don't discount that. And don't just go for the name. Go for the place that you feel like you can live for the next 5 years, and the people that you feel like you can hang out with for the next 5 years, because that's your family for 5 years. And that's what I think with residents. Could I be with this person for 5 years? I mean, with the applicants. And sometimes I'm like, I could not spend 5 years with that person. So just remember that. You do actually get to pick your family sometimes.
Dr. Souls.
Just try to enjoy it a little bit. It's hard to relax, but if you just knowing that, like, ultimately this specialty is filled with amazing people like all of us, your future colleagues, right? So just try to relax and enjoy that, and know that, ultimately, no matter where you match, you are going to be doing a really cool thing, orthopedic surgery, and maybe even orthopedic trauma someday.
Dr. Weaver.
I would just echo that. I would say, first off, congratulations. Like, you're here and you're going to make it. Like, if you're really committed, then you're going to make it this year. If not, it's okay. It's a long journey. You'll find your way and you'll make it there. And it's, I count my blessings every single day. Like, this is an incredible specialty. And I think you guys are on a great path. And so, I think you've heard some great advice. Welcome aboard. Like, orthopedics is really cool. And we look forward to working with you.
Awesome. Phil, you got anything?
I do. I'm so glad I'm last. I wanted to answer one question in the chat, which just asked about how to make your rank list and like ranking the program you have the best shot at versus the one you like the most. I think that's a pretty complicated question. I just rank the one I like the most. One, I'm going to shoot my shot. This is the only time I'm applying to orthopedic residency. Use your mentors to help guide you. My piece of advice comes from Dr. Rout last year, who I think about it all the time now. And it's a little bit unusual, but it's so apt. And it's look for clowns. And the reason that is so apt is because this is a hard job, but it is so much freaking fun when you're surrounded by people who love working hard, who love working together as a team. And sometimes it means you have a few jokers who keep things light. And so when you go to a program and you're evaluating the culture, look for folks who are happy and working hard. And so I loved every minute of residency, just about, and would do it again in a heartbeat, because I was surrounded by people who loved working hard and loved being part of a team. So
that's great to close us out on, for sure. Thanks, everybody, for your time. We know it's incredibly valuable. We really appreciate all your input, and hopefully the students are all going to be rock stars on that interview trail when they come visit each of you. So, all right, everybody, have a good night. Thanks again.